welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everybody. This is Evelyn Hershkowitz, Reader Services Librarian at Turn the Page podcast. And today we are lucky to have with us Dawn Tripp. Dawn's new book is called Jackie, which of course is about Jackie O. Loved the book, absolutely adored it, and we're going to get into that. I'm just going to read a little bit about Dawn. Dawn is the author of the novel Georgia, which was a national bestseller, a finalist for the New England Book Award, and winner of the Mary Lynn Coates Award for Art and Literature. She's the author of 3 previous novels, Game of Secrets, Moontide, and The Season of Open Water, which won the Massachusetts Book Award for Fiction. Her poems and essays have appeared in the Virginia Quarterly Review, Harvard Review, AGNI, Conjunctions, and NPR, among others. She serves on the board of the Boston Book Festival and the board of Gnome Surf, a nonprofit surf therapy organization focused on creating a culture shift towards kindness, love, and acceptance for athletes of all abilities. She graduated from Harvard and lives in Massachusetts with her sons. Thank you, Dawn, so much for joining us.
Evelyn, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So Jackie, a novel by Dawn Tripp, was fabulous. I absolutely adored it. The writing is great. I don't know how you came up with all this dialogue from Jackie. I just loved it. And the cover is amazing. So we'll talk about that also. So where was your love for Jackie? What made you decide to write about her?
You know, she's an icon of American history. And I had never really wondered who she was as a person, which sounds like a strange thing, but we sometimes with someone who's so well known and so visible, they actually aren't always seen for their full range of their kind of humanity and their personhood. And I became intrigued by her specifically when I was reading aloud to my sons. They were so little. This was a long time ago, maybe 15 years ago. They were young. We used to read all the time as a family, and, you know, trips to the bookstores, independent bookstores, trips to the libraries were just cherished outings. And my older son's first crush was on our local librarian, which I always considered a major accomplishment as a mother. But he just loved books and still love books. But the boys would come home with these stacks from the library, and we would just lie in bed reading, lie on the couch reading, you know, sit outside on the porch reading. And one day the oldest came home with the best loved poems of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, and I was reading it to them aloud in bed that night. And I read the introduction aloud to them, which I don't always do, but it was a short introduction and it was written by Caroline. Right. And I was intrigued to hear what her lens was on her mother's love of books. And it was revelatory to me, the way Caroline spoke about how books and poetry and literature were dimensions of her childhood that were integral to their everyday life as a family. And the closing quote of that introduction, in the closing passage, Caroline spoke about how from both of her parents, she and her brother had inherited a faith in the power of ideas and the words that we use to express them as the greatest power that we have. And I remember being so struck by that sentence. I remember being so struck by that concept. And it was the first time that I asked the question, you know, who was Jackie Kennedy? Who was she? This icon of American history, who shaped history, even as she was living it. Who was she underneath the woman we think we see? And I feel like every book for a novelist, at least for me as a novelist, begins with a driving question, a sort of a seed of curiosity. If that sort of burn is sharp enough, then it will grow and it will sustain me through the years that it takes to research and write a novel, particularly one that's based, to the extent that Jackie is, in the historical record.
So what was the research like?
The research was overwhelming. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's the word. There's just so much that's written. And I didn't jump into the novel right away. And I didn't commit to the idea right away because I wasn't sure I could do it. And I wasn't sure that I wanted to move through all that research and all of those books that were out there. And I wasn't sure that I had anything new to contribute, any new vantage point. And that was important to me. I wasn't interested in writing something reiterative. I wasn't really interested in some of the salacious details of her life and their life together, in their marital life together and their love. I wasn't interested in those pieces. I was really interested in her mind. I was interested in her intellectual life. I was interested in who she was as a woman, as a mother, as a wife. I was interested in how she had forged a legacy out of grief in the wake of her husband's assassination, which took place directly in front of her. I was really curious to understand how she had been able to kind of move forward in those 4 days in the wake of that event and steward the country, and then continue to steward his initiatives that he had started during his administration, including the civil rights bill that she was committed to getting passed, including his commitment to the moon landing.
Right.
I was really curious to understand how she had emerged from something that was so tragic, that unthinkable violence, and had gone on to really shape that course of history. And at the same time, construct with care and intention a relatively sane life for herself and her children in the wake of that unthinkable violence. Because that told me so much about her character and the integrity of her character. And that's what I was interested in. And so when I was starting to do the research, those were the details in the historical record that I was looking to extract. I was not as interested in what Jackie herself once called the river of sludge. It was really a process. The research for this book was different than the research for Georgia, which was more of an excavation. The research for this book was a process of distillation and discernment, and really gathering out of those facts the anecdotes and personal recollections, and even Jackie's words and words of people who knew her that described her intellectual character, the ferocity of her mind, and also her emotional warmth and her moral character. Those were the things that were interesting to me, as was her commitment to privacy and her commitment to a life of literature, which of course evolved into her 2-decade career as a book editor, which she continued to do into the end of her life. Does that make sense? So it was a process of weeding through so many accounts, but to find and highlight different details that had not necessarily been brought forward. Even a biographical account or a nonfiction account, it's always an interpretation, depending on the selection and the elision and the assembling of facts. And I just believe that fiction can, if it's grounded in the historical record, can create an interpretation that allows us to see differently and experience differently a person, an era, or a life.
Well, she had some life. I mean, just being in the car when her husband was assassinated, I don't know how anybody comes back from that. I mean, that's just unbelievable.
And I feel like to not spend time and to not recognize that was such an incident of trauma. And, I reflected a lot on trauma and grief and the dissociation that can happen afterwards. And I read things that she had said years later about that period of time, which was for her an excruciatingly dark time. And I would find those little pieces. I am a poet first, right? So I work in the granular, and I would find those little pieces that would give light for me, that would shine light into what she might have experienced, how she might have gone on to do all that she did in the wake of that event. And at the same time, how her love for her husband, because that was actually one of the most revelatory things for me, is that in the process of my research, people have asked me, what surprised you the most? What was
exactly
what
the question I have
most?
written here? What surprised you the most about Jackie in your research?
What surprised me the most is that they were in love.
Yeah.
This was a love story. And I was not expecting to find that.
Mhm.
I
Well,
really
knowing how much he
believe,
cheated on her, I mean,
well,
that's
but
well
he also
known.
said towards the end of his life, there's only one woman in this world I could have married, and I
Yeah.
married her. And she even said down, years later, she said, the first time we marry is for love.
Hmm.
And when I began to really dig in to all of the ways that they were connected, the sort of the powerful intellectual bond they had, the conspiratorial, like that sense of humor that they shared, that wit that she sometimes would get a joke that he made, or she would make a joke that only he would get. Like, no, they were the smartest people in the room, in almost every room. And they really understood the power of politics and poetry. They really understood the power of creating a culture that could give rise to a faith in American ideals, ideals that the country was founded on. They built that together. That was incredible. And they worked in partnership and sometimes at odds with each other and sort of challenging each other. But the bond between them was real. And in the wake of Patrick's death in August 1963, their baby that was born and only lived for a few days, that loss brought them together. There's a deep intimacy that is a through line through their relationship. And also, they really came together. He was there for her, he was fully present for her in her grief in ways that he had maybe not been able to be as fully present
Well,
up
in
to
the
that
first,
moment.
when she had the stillborn baby, he was out
He was
gallivanting,
not,
and that
yeah, he
bothered
was
me.
not there.
That really,
Yeah,
that
he was
really
not there.
disturbed
He
me.
was not there then. He was not there then, but he was
Right.
there in the wake of Patrick's death. And, when you read so many historical accounts and so many personal accounts of that time of other people, and even little words that she shared, because she was very private, she didn't share a lot, but in her tribute to him that was done in 1964, it was written for the anniversary of his death. It was in Look magazine. Her tribute of him, it was real. It was just so genuine, her faith in who he was, as not just as a leader, but who he was as a human being. And that's what I was not expecting to find, that sense that they had a true love story that was complicated, as love stories often are, but it felt enduring. And I believe that she was the love of his life and he was the love of hers.
Yeah, no, it was wonderful. Not only was she a wonderful wife, she was also an amazing mother. I mean, I think that was her number one priority, and you certainly showed that in the book. I mean, her marrying Onassis, I think one of the main reasons was just to protect her children. She felt that he
To
was the
keep her
one that was
children,
going to be
keep
able
her
to do that.
children safe. Yeah. And
Get
I
them.
think in the wake of Jack's assassination and then of Bobby's assassination, and just from, sort of thinking into that period of 1968 and how much violence there was. King's assassination, Bobby's, like, it was just, there was not a sense of safety, that she did not feel a sense of safety at that
Right.
time. And she wanted to keep her children safe. I do feel that one of the and I was expecting to find this, but it was confirmed again and again in the research, is that her care and commitment to her children and her identity as a mother was fundamental to her character. And I found that not only in her words and in kind of memories of her that were shared by other people, contemporary accounts of her and what she did in order to shape a life for her children and shape the environment where they could grow up with a sense of inquiry, with a sense of intellectual passion, with also a sense of responsibility and a faith in the power of service, and a belief in the legacy of their father's vision as a leader. Those were things that she deliberately worked to construct for her children. And I found that again and again. I also found evidence of her power as a mother in the words of her children. and their care for her as she aged. They were right with her as she aged. When she got sick, they were right there. And that says so much about who she was as a mother. I remember reading when she was building her house on Martha's Vineyard, and she was there with Bunny Mellon. She bought the piece of land, and she was there with her friend Bunny Mellon. They were laying the house out with string. And, we sometimes think of Jackie in this sort of rarefied way, and this kind of the glitz and the glamour and the erudition. And yet she wanted to build a house that her children would want to come home to. And every time I say that, I sort of get a little teary, but like, she wanted to build a house that her children would want to come home to.
Right.
She wanted comfortable chairs where people would want to sit. Like, those little details say so much about what she valued and who she was. And those are not things that we always associate with her.
Correct.
Does that make sense?
That is true. I picture her riding horses, walking through Central Park. I like the scene at the end while she was walking through Central Park, and her daughter and her grandchildren were with her. And I mean, that was a great scene. I really like that scene. And I didn't know she was such a smoker.
Yeah.
She smoked like nonstop.
And she was a nail biter. And she read Reinhold Niebuhr for fun. And she loved the works of novelist Edna O'Brien. And
My mother did too. That's funny.
Snapped up the translation rights of the Egyptian writer Naguib Mahfouz. Like, she had an incredibly diverse and eclectic list as an editor. That was also really interesting to me. And again, something that we don't always think about when we think about her, not just the range of titles she published, but also the diverse voices that she was bringing forward, and voices that weren't always heard. And she was bringing them out into the world through the books that she edited, that she didn't always want her name in the acknowledgments. She didn't always want the credit. She didn't always want to be seen. She really took great joy in being able to split and, to have the public self out there, the persona, which she once called, like, I think the cartoon of her life that people saw, and then to have her ordinary life running underneath where she could be free. There's a video. It's extraordinary, Evelyn. It's housed in the archives of the JFK library.
And it's a home video. I went.
Well, and it's a video of her water skiing. It's taken in 1962. She's a gorgeous water skier, and she always slalom skied. There is a grace, a strength, and an athleticism to how she skied. When you see it, it's one of those images. And again, it's a moving image, it's a video where you realize, oh my gosh, she's not the person that I thought she was. Like, she is so strong and so graceful in how she's carving back, and so skilled and athletic in how she's carving back and forth over the wake. In another clip of that same video, she's water skiing and she's holding little Caroline in her arms
while she's water skiing. Oh my God.
She's water skiing. Who can do that?
That's pretty incredible.
Is that what we associate with Jackie Kennedy?
Well, you did have her water skiing quite a few times in the book. So you did put that in there.
But holding her daughter while she skied. Wow. And then in another clip, skiing alongside astronaut John Glenn, right? So it's very interesting. You have these three sort of little bits in this one short film. And it's Jackie water skiing alone with this grace and athleticism and strength. Jackie, water skiing, both she and John Glenn, both on solo, mono skis, on, skiing slalom. And then you have a third cut of Jackie water skiing, holding her daughter. And I just feel like that's an example of the kind of thing I was looking for in my research, these different dimensions of her that gave me a kaleidoscopic view of this range of selves, and this incredibly free spirit who also had this very public self that feels more stylized. And yet the range of who she was underneath and in her private life, it was astonishing. It was
Yeah.
extraordinary. She was an extraordinary, remarkable woman who lived a remarkable life.
Yeah. No, I went to that museum. I loved it, JFK Library. That was just, I had the greatest day when we went to that. And that must have been
It's an
very helpful for
extraordinary
you.
place. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was. It was both the history
Mhm.
of how it wound up in that particular section of Boston, the history of that journey, which I detail a little bit in the novel,
Mhm.
and also the actual site that Jackie was very committed to. Jackie and Bobby both were very committed to building and stewarding to create a living legacy and a testimony to the ideals that both she and Jack and their supporters were working to bring forward that are really grounded in the founding values of America.
So now, how long did it take you to write this book? Because it's not a small book. It's a very nice size.
It took me 10 years, but I did turn away from it for a while around 2017, 2018, and I came back to it during COVID. Yeah, I
Mhm.
turned away from it for a little while because I felt like I couldn't do it. I had a lot going on in my life. Also, there was cancer and some other family challenges, and it was hard. It was a hard time. And but all fine now. I'm all, cancer free, but it was a hard time. I wasn't able to kind of be in it in the way that I knew that I needed to be in it in order to write it. I worried I might turn away from it.
Wow. I'm
It was
glad you did
actually
it.
my dad who said to me, "You've got to go back to that book. You really believe in that woman. You really believe in that woman that we think we see, and you need to go back in and you need to find your way in." And he said to me something that was really impactful. He said, "Go spend time with those dimensions of the story that first inspired you. Go reconnect with your joy, the joy you took when you first started, researching the project." And I started looking through photographs, not the photographs that we sort of know and see. I started digging to find more candid photographs that are less well known. And it was when I found the photograph that's on the cover of the book, actually.
What a great picture.
Yeah. So it's a photograph of Jack and Jackie. They're standing in the doorway of an airport, and they were young. It was June 1957, and they had been married for almost 4 years. And when you first look at the image, she's standing with her back to the camera, her skirt's filled with wind, and he's leaning in toward her, perhaps to kiss her goodbye, perhaps to say something.
I think it's
And
a kiss.
I think so, but there's something very complex in that image. The way she's standing, there's a kind of awkwardness. There's an intimacy, but it's a tentative intimacy. There's a vulnerability. And I saw that photograph and I stopped. I just stopped. And that was when I looked at that image of their faces together, close together, her back to the camera, he's leaning in toward her. And I wanted to know, what is she thinking in that moment? What is he saying? What has he just said? What has just happened? What is just about to happen in that moment? Where's he going? What is going on in that moment, in that intimacy between them? And I wrote into that photograph. I wrote into not the photograph, but the moment. And over the next few days, I wrote longhand in my notebook, which is where I do all my sort of my best work usually, is longhand in my notebook. And I wrote into that moment. And in the novel, they each remember that moment several times and in different ways. And it matters to them each. But that was again, that was the moment where I suddenly had the voice of the novel. The passages I wrote from Jackie's point of view about that moment were all written first person. And I went back, and that was 2018, or 2019, right before COVID. I went back in and I started the book from page one. I started it all over again. And
so you had
that
another
was the
whole,
voice. Yeah. Yeah. Third person. Yeah.
Wow.
I had another whole copy of the book, but it wasn't working. And so I just let it go and I rewrote it all from the first person. Yeah.
That's a lot
and
of
then
work.
then it worked. Then I could feel it. And I've been doing this for 25 years and you can feel like there's a moment where a book is a lot, like you feel it, like the voice is alive. It's the voice of the story. And then you know it's going to work. But I didn't feel that even through all those years of research. I didn't have that sense, okay, this is what it needs to be.
Right. But you also have Jack's point of view
Mm-hmm.
throughout the book, which
Yeah,
is
there's some Jack chapters that are cut through. They're very few, but they were important because they gave a lens of Jackie. They also offered a view, sometimes I think again, like with someone who's so visible, so well known, such an icon, we forget that they were human. We forget that they were people. And that was again, the question that kept surfacing for me after I saw that photograph. Who was she? Who was he? Who were they together before they were myth? Who were they as young people? In the early stages of a young marriage, an early love affair with all the complicated joys and thorns that come with that. Who was she underneath the woman we think we see? And that really is the driving question of the book. That's the question that I spend about 400 something pages answering and exploring.
She was also so close to Joe Kennedy.
She was.
Yeah.
She was.
And that's a tough, he was a tough one.
Tough cookie. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they had an incredible banter. They had an incredible intellectual bond.
Right. Has anybody in the Kennedy family reached out to you at all?
No, I don't anticipate that. I have had a few people who knew her, who have read it and who have appreciated it, and that's mattered to me. It's just not something that I would look for or expect.
Okay. I just wanted to say that the book has gotten really good reviews. It got starred reviews in Library Journal, Book List, Shelf Awareness. I mean, that is fabulous. That must have felt really good to get all those starred reviews.
I think what really matters to me is readers. What really matters to me is when readers like you, Evelyn, and readers, I had an event yesterday down in Chatham in Cape Cod, and we're just so many readers who'd already read the book and who love the book. They're readers who've written to me through my website, my emails on my website, and they've written to me to tell me that they love the book and they felt like it really changed their understanding and their estimation of her. And that matters to me.
Well, one thing I want to bring up for those of you listening, if you want it as a book club, I think it's fabulous. You have this great book club kit. I mean, you wrote a wonderful letter from the author, great letter. The discussion questions are so great. Their favorite books, which is so exciting. The recipes look great. I mean, this is just for if somebody who wants to do a book discussion on it, this is the best. It's fabulous. And I personally would like to do a book discussion. So we don't usually
if you do that, and I love to zoom in.
Would you do that for us?
I'm already doing a number of book clubs starting actually at the end of this month. There's the first one.
That's great.
And then I have a couple in August. Yeah.
We usually don't do them until the book's out in paperback, so it's going to be a little while. But I would love that. And I'm sure our patrons would absolutely love that. The book is available on Overdrive. We have a print copy here at the library. So if you're interested, please let us know. We'll be happy to put you on hold for it. I enjoyed speaking with you so much, Dawn. Thank you so much. It was great.
Evelyn, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
To hear from you, author, all around about the book. And I will be handing this book to many of our patrons. So
I'm so happy. I love libraries. Libraries, they serve our community. They bring readers and writers together. I remember being in the Newton Library, which is where I grew up. And I remember being about 6 years old and looking at the shelves of books and having that moment where I understood behind every single spine, every single cover, there was a world. And that is for me, a magic that I've carried with me through my life. In my room behind me, you can see, Evelyn.
I love that bookshelf. That's beautiful.
Everywhere. Yeah, it's my favorite item in this house, my favorite piece of furniture.
I think that's a great bookshelf. I love that. I couldn't agree more. I have books everywhere in my house. So books are everywhere. That's, it's
everywhere.
It's the best. Reading is just so great. I wish I could write. I can't, but I can read. So at least I get that out of it.
Read, and you love to talk about books.
I do.
And you love to connect. readers with books they will love, and that
Yeah.
matters.
I do that
What
every single
matters is that
day.
people are reading. Well, I'll just leave you with this. Jackie had a wonderful quote that, again, for me, was something I carried throughout the years that it took me to develop this novel. She once said, "There are many little ways to enlarge your child's world. Love of books is the best of all."
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. Dawn, I need to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Evelyn.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.